Yes, it is, ladies and gentlemen. It is time for us to learn more about FileMaker Pro. My name is Matt Petrowski, bringing you this video tutorial and lesson. And what are we learning in this lesson? We are learning about fonts and typography. So stick with me and we'll be on my desktop in just a few. Alrighty, so today's lesson, what are we talking about? Fonts and typography. Maybe it's a little bit boring, but maybe not. Maybe there's some things that you need to know when you're working in FileMaker Pro, especially if you want to design things from a cross-platform standpoint. Now, obligatory message here, if you found this video as a result of a YouTube search and you're interested in taking all of these videos in sequence, this is series number 4 out of the 4 that I've shot. So there's 3 others. There's the environment of FileMaker, FileMaker's calculations and fields, and then data and structure. And we're looking at layouts and design in this particular series. We're on video number 10, and you can click on the channel icon just below this video, and that will take you to my channel, and there you will find all of the individual series. Also, if you would like to follow along as I cover things in this video, you can, in the description down below, click on a link to download this file. So as I select the file right now from my copy of FileMaker, which, by the way, I'm using FileMaker Pro 16 when I'm shooting this video. So this will work with FileMaker 16 and higher, obviously, but this will also work whatever we cover here in FileMaker earlier versions, going back to probably 14 and earlier. So what are we talking about? Fonts and typography. So typically, the best thing to do when you're working on a FileMaker solution is to choose one and no more than, let's say, 2 fonts at the most. Now, you can complement fonts with each other. For example, this font that I have right here, when I go to the Appearance tab of the inspector, and I collapse everything down since we're looking at fonts, we can see that this is Helvetica New. Now, the font that you choose really comes down to what is the platform that you're going to deploy on. And each platform, Windows versus Macintosh, but we can't forget iOS, has their own fonts that look really well. Now, it used to be that Helvetica New worked really good for iOS, but iOS switched to a custom font. I forget what it's called. I'd have to look that up. Maybe somebody will put that in the comments or in the chat that we'll see at the end of this video. But the custom font on iOS now is not available in FileMaker. FileMaker does not have that embedded into FileMaker Go. So most of the time we're choosing a font based on what will work cross-platform. Now we're going to address this because if you're working on a Macintosh, but you're designing something for Windows, then sure, you could select a font and choose something like your standard Helvetica, which in this menu, which is really nice, is as I scroll here, when I make a selection, typically you can use the keyboard and just start to type. So you notice that as I type right now, I just typed AV and it jumped to Avenir. If I type HEL, it's trying to select Helvetica New, which is in my, my recently used fonts. But if I try to type Helvetica, sometimes it will jump all the way down here to the bottom and jump to the font that I want to use. So that's a nice little tip right there, is you can get to the font that you want to use quickly, although once you've selected a font, you're not making that change too often. Now, the way that FileMaker works is thus. If there is a companion mapping for a font, then FileMaker will attempt its best to map that on the when the file is opened on the other platform. So I'm working on the Macintosh right here, and I have selected Helvetica. So what FileMaker will attempt to do is if I open this file on Windows, it will attempt to use Helvetica, and if Helvetica does not exist, it will use an equivalent font, or the closest that it can find, which is going to be Arial. Now, the key is, or one of the things that I like to do is no matter what platform I'm working on, Windows or Macintosh, I prefer, if I'm designing for that other platform, on the opposing platform. In this case, if I'm on the Macintosh and I'm designing for Windows, I prefer to have the actual fonts that come from that platform. And we'll take a look at how I do this. But beyond that, what I do is, if I'm designing a cross-platform design, there's a few things that we need to be aware of. Now, the block that I have right here that is obscuring, a couple of lessons ago in the previous videos, we took a look at formatting fields. And this field is formatted to show, I'll just move this off to the side when we go into browse mode and save the changes. It is showing the date, but because it's timestamp, it's including the date and the time, and I have to get rid of that, and the only way that I can get rid of it is FileMaker's formatting doesn't allow me to, so I'm obscuring it. So that's why that block was there that we had to get rid of or temporarily move to the side. So back to the fonts. So the fonts, one of the things that I do is I attempt to design my solutions so that they will work cross-platform. Now that comes from, number one, with what we've already discussed, picking a font that will have a good mapping between the two. But a mapping alone of the font, saying, FileMaker, you're going to map Helvetica to Arial or Arial to Helvetica, may not be exactly what you want, because when it comes to fonts, there is a thing called the font metrics. And the font metrics is the spacing between, and I think I'll be able to get that, it'll wrap right there, but it'll be the spacing between the fonts, or between the letters, not between the fonts. The spacing between the letters is controlled by the font file that's used on the respective operating system. Now, the one thing you have to be aware of is that you need to give the text block, that's this whole object, everything surrounding this text, enough space. If I made this block of text the smallest that it will be, for example, right now, if you didn't see what I just did, I dragged this block to be much smaller than the actual text, and when I let go, FileMaker will size that out to the absolute size that it needs given the current font. If I do that just for Helvetica, then it's very likely that this text, when it opened on Windows, would not look very good. It would get cut off. Now, you always, when you design cross-platform in FileMaker, you want to open your files on Windows or on both platforms. If you're working on Macintosh, you want to open on Windows as well. But the rule of thumb is always drag out the box and give it a little bit extra space. This is also a reason, probably a reason, that what FileMaker does is, by default, it starts with all of its text aligned up at the top. Now, I don't like that, because I like to use the box as a bounding area in order to indicate to me what is the personal space of that font. In other words, what shouldn't encroach onto this particular object. So I like to vertically align most of my text. When I need something top aligned, that's when I go to top alignment. Otherwise, everything else for me is vertically aligned. So by giving that extra bit of space, you know now that the font metrics won't really bite you. And by that, we can always take a look and switch to the font that is supported. Now, on the Macintosh, there are a number of fonts that are cross-platform compatible. In other words, we have Arial, and Arial matches Arial over on Windows. But we don't have certain fonts that are specifically on a given platform. And notice what happened when I switched there from Arial to Helvetica. Notice that something changed. If you didn't see that, you can rewind the video and look that there is some spacing that increased between the two fonts because of the font metrics. And even though I switched back to Helvetica, that font spacing didn't go away. So there's a little bit of stuff that goes on with regards to what FileMaker has to do between these two fonts. Well, there it switched right there again. I saw it. When I hit that Helvetica, it went back to a tighter, okay, one of them, it's in FileMaker, what we're dealing with is the line spacing. That's the value right here. But in typography, which I learned this in advertising way back in college, one is kerning and one is tracking. And one is it's kerning, tracking, and line spacing. If you want to look up those terms, you can. I'm not going to do it right here in the video. But I believe kerning is the space between the letters. Tracking is maybe the space between words. and then the line space is the space between each line. Now pay attention when you're working with your fonts and your typography, if you do have multiple lines. When it comes to reading things on screen, there's two things that make text easier to read. One of them we have control over, the other we do not. With our fonts here, we do not have control, as I double click in here, we do not have control with the spacing, or I believe kerning is the right word in the typography world, of the space between letters. We just don't have that fine-grained control. And the letters, if the farther apart they are, the more difficult they are to read. The closer that they are, the easier the text becomes to read on screen. Also, with multiple lines, the spacing between those lines, text gets either easier to read or harder to read. So we do have the control of the line spacing, where I can say for this block of text, I want this to be 1.5 and increase the distance between those lines. So that's just your standard word processing. Do I want this to be single spaced or double lines, 1.5, everything that you find in the word processing documents. So a lot of the times when I'm dealing with really small text, let's make this, say for example, Helvetica 12 point, and I need to make this so that it wraps, and we'll make it so that it does wrap there. I will decrease the line height to a value of something like 0.9 or 0.8. Now again, this varies based on the font that you choose to use. And again, we still haven't solved the problem that what if I'm designing on Macintosh for a Windows client for a font that doesn't exist on this platform? And likewise, what if we're working on Windows and we're designing for something on the Macintosh? Well, we can solve that problem by copying the font files themselves. So this spacing right here is not very comfortable for this particular font, for Helvetica. So I'm going to put this back at 1. And it always depends on each of the fonts that you're choosing to use. So notice this. When I zoom out here and we go to the theme file. So here's the theme file. This is from FileMaker Themes, by the way, which we're going to take this quick little pause for this.
This video has been brought to you by FileMakerThemes.com. It's a one-stop shop for choosing a theme to apply to your new or existing FileMaker solution. When considering your next move toward advancing the look and feel of your FileMaker solution, don't forget to visit FileMakerThemes.com.
Aha, you didn't think I was going to stick it in there, did you? But I did. I've got to make money somehow from these free YouTube videos. The font file here, or not the font file, but the theme file that I imported from FileMaker Themes into this particular solution, and you have the theme. Notice that all of the fonts that I've put on here are intentionally have multiple lines, and that is because at larger sizes, a font may seem like it has more space between each line when it's a larger font than when it's a smaller font. So as you move through these, the intention is by having multiple lines for each size of font allows me to be able to adjust the spacing. So you can see right here for font bigger, I have a 0.8 spacing, whereas with font normal, I leave it at just a normal 1 spacing. So this does make a difference in the aesthetics of your user interface design. For example, if I take font biggest right here and I change it from 0.8 to 1, the spacing, it doesn't feel as comfortable. At least that's the case for me. So if you know this now, you can now make the change that when you get really large text and you know that that text is going to wrap, and it applies to text blocks and to text fields, or to any field, take the opportunity to adjust that line spacing, make it a little bit more comfortable. And that's a really good way to go. All right, so I've discussed the fonts and the styles, and we've got the theme right here. Probably the last thing that I'm going to leave you with today is when you're working cross-platform, there are a few tricks that I do. Number one, I copy fonts. So as I switch over to VMware, I'm in a copy of Windows 10 here, and it doesn't matter. I've done this going all the way back to Windows XP, all the way back. One of the things that I always do, because I work on a Macintosh, and if you're working on Windows and you don't have a Macintosh, ask a Macintosh buddy to give you the font files. Now, both operating systems will use the same font files, but the font file that you're typically going to have the most luck with is Truetype Format. There's different font formats. There's PostScript files, which have two different, they have a bitmap, and then they have the actual PostScript file. There are OpenType format files. There is, I think, that I know of, 5 or 6 different formats. But Truetype is the one that tends to be the operating system, or at least it has been. And really all you have to do is this. I'll show this over here, my fonts folder. So what I did is, as I select here, and we'll zoom in, you can see that and here on the Macintosh, what you can do is you can click or command click on in a Finder window, you can command click on that description of wherever you are, and it will show you the reverse hierarchy. So it'll show me my computer, my hard drive, my user folder, my personal home folder, then library and fonts. So if you're on a Macintosh and you'd like to get to this folder, the easiest way is to do this. I do Command Shift G, which is stands for, it's under the Go menu. You put in the tilde, and then you put in that library/fonts, and then go to that. Over on Windows, my head's probably blocking it. We'll move that off to the side. If you go into the search area and you just simply start to type fonts, what you get is you should get View Installed Fonts or Fonts Control Panel, something to that effect, where you open up and it will show you all of these fonts. So the really cool thing here is that you can copy files between the two now. It doesn't matter what you're going to do to transfer, whether it's over the network or what have you. Here with the Macintosh, what's really nice about VMware is I can just drag and drop. So you notice that what I have right here is already a selection of Truetype fonts. So basically this came directly from Windows. So over here in Windows, I would take the Calibri font, just drag it and drop it right over in my fonts folder. So as I release here, it would probably tell me, do I want to replace? And there it is right there. I'll just say don't replace, apply to all, don't replace, because I already have them because they are right here. Calibri, Cambria, Kandara, a lot of the standard fonts. So this is an ideal situation. When you have the actual font files from the opposing operating system, like who's opposing my Macintosh? It must be Windows. Of course, for Windows, who's opposing my Macintosh? It's much easier to design. So notice with this font selected now and with the inspector, if I'm designing here on the Macintosh for Windows, I have the exact font. And it works exactly as expected. And it's wonderful. I can go right to Calibri. Let's scroll down to it. And there we go. Now I know as I design on the Macintosh that when I transfer this over to Windows, everything will look great, including all of the issues where I give it enough space. So if it's too small, I know that it's the exact same font and I can give it the amount of space that it needs. But on top of that, I like to go one step further. And that is, as I revert this particular style, I'll revert the changes so that it goes back. I am typically designing for cross-platform, meaning I want it to work on both Macintosh and Windows, but also on iOS or on FileMaker Go. That can all be solved by picking a font that will work on all of the platforms, and if it does not, then picking something using some conditional formatting in order to make that change for the particular platform. So for me, Helvetica New is the default font if I'm designing something that's going to be used on iOS for FileMaker Go and also look well on Macintosh. Then, in order to solve the problem for Windows, all I do is this. Right-click on the object or the text block or the field, choose conditional formatting, and then we're going to add a conditional format. Under that format or the formula, we're going to add a FileMaker calculation. And we're going to start to type in get platform, I believe, get system platform right there. And the system platform, I believe, I may have to look up the documentation. I'm going to open up Dash really quick and make sure that I get this correct. Let me bring that on screen because it's off screen. We'll show the FileMaker help, and I will say platform. This just helps me out. Get system platform. There we are right there. You can see that 1 for the current platform is Intel Base Max. We can see that because of historical reasons, it's still a -2. So, in fact, down here you can see right here, abs. FileMaker even suggests it within their examples and tells you get system platform is 2. It would be nice if it was just 1, 2, and 3, but again, this was a holdover from when there was a big distinction between 32-bit and 64-bit, I think. So what we do is we just wrap that right there and say abs get system platform equals 2, or you could just take off the abs and leave it for the -2 if you want to, unless you don't like that negative. But once we have that one setting right there, this conditional formatting is saying if we're on a Windows platform, what do we want to do? Well, in that case, we want to click on more formatting and we want to use a different font. And let's go and use a Windows specific font and try to match them up if you want. So that if you're going to use a sans serif, such as Helvetica, then you wouldn't want to use conditional formatting and make it something like Times New Roman, where it does have serifs. And serifs are basically the little part that swoops out from the font. If you didn't know, in typography, let's put in Times here. That should be Times. So the little swoopy part right there of the T, everything that's going out, those are the little serifs, as opposed to the sans serif or without serif. So those are my suggestions when it comes to fonts. Number 1, get the fonts from the other platform onto your system. Once they're installed, you can design with them. If you're going to go full cross-platform, then use conditional formatting. The only downside to conditional formatting is that if you have a lot of conditional formatting, and basically in a true cross-platform solution, I might have this on every one of my fonts and every one of my fields. And of course, remember, it's always easiest to just duplicate once you've got conditional formatting on all of these at one time. Also remember, your other conditional formatting, things where fonts are changing color based on data in your solution, anything where the calculation is really simple and very easy to evaluate, that's not a heavy burden on processing for FileMaker. What becomes a heavy burden is when you're processing conditional formatting through complex calculations, where you've got a lot of things going through relationships or using execute SQL. That would be much more complex. The conditional formatting that we have here is not complex. It's very quick and easy for FileMaker to evaluate this. And even if I had 100 different fields and text blocks on the layout, this is not a big cost. So I'm not saying be wary of adding it to all of your fields, because you would be hard-pressed to find a distinction between the speed if you're just using this type of conditional formatting. But I'm just mentioning, when you add this to all of your fonts or all of your fields, plus your own conditional formatting, you might be able to tell that there's a difference. But again, don't be so worried about it that it prevents you from doing it. And here's a little trick that I'll leave you with on this particular video. If you know that objects that you have styled and you want to use this do not have their own custom conditional formatting. What I mean is this: if I had a conditional formatting on this one text object where I just said true, and I was going to make that text color blue, and say, okay, so in browse mode here, that one font or that one object is going to be blue. If that is not the case, or if I don't care, you can apply conditional formatting to multiple objects. And it works like this. Just select all of your multiple objects, all of these fonts, all at one time. Then right-click and choose conditional formatting. Now, the way that this works is whatever I apply to all of them will get this one setting, meaning the setting that I have that is set for that one font to be blue, it will be wiped out. But there is a trick here that I could click add right now. There's a trick that I believe, based on the stacking order, you can get the conditional formatting of the lowest object or the highest object. Let's take a look. We'll go to what we learned yesterday, which was our layout objects palette, which is really helpful. We will see where font biggest is in relation to font bigger. All right, so that one is above that one is above that one. Font biggest is the one that has a conditional formatting that I want. I'm going to drag font biggest underneath all of these, and then I'm going to select all of them and see if my thought process... Nope, it isn't going to work. Maybe it's all the way at the top. There used to be the case that whichever object was in a certain position relative to the stacking order, you would be able to... There. So I don't know if you noticed that on the video. You may have to rewind. It looks like if it's the topmost object, and I right-click on that, so it should work here in the Layout Objects palette, and or here, if I right-click and choose Conditional Formatting. There we go. If it's the topmost object in the stacking order, the Conditional Formatting will take whatever is set on that topmost object. And now if I click OK, because I have multiple objects selected, all of them received that formatting. So it's a bulk operation. It's the quickest way to apply bulk conditional formatting. This is your wonderful takeaway for today's lesson, to multiple objects. And it'll work with fields, it'll work with text blocks, but remember, it wipes out any other conditional formatting that you've applied. So that font big, where this one had that blue, when I go look at the conditional formatting, blue was wiped out. So in this case, if I knew only that one field had conditional formatting, I could apply bulk to everything that I want all at one time, then go back and apply the blue. And here, this one may even blow your mind even a little bit further. If you want to apply bulk conditional formatting to all objects of a particular kind, there is a trick that you can do in FileMaker. FileMaker, under its Edit menu, when we zoom in right here, has a Select All option. But if I hold down, and I've shown this in the environment series of videos going all the way back to September of this year, if I hold down the Option key, notice that it turns from Select All to Select Same, meaning when I select the same of all text blocks, it selected all text blocks on the whole layout. So all at one time, let's see if I right-click and get my conditional formatting. I do not. I would have to make this object the topmost object, right-click on it, and then in one fell swoop, my whole layout, all text blocks would get my conditional formatting that says, if the user's on Windows, change this to the font Calibri. And it's really pretty cool. It makes your FileMaker solution... It gives it that touch that users are expecting. If I'm on Macintosh, I want to see a Macintosh look and feel. If I'm on Windows, I want to see a Windows look and feel. And that boils down to using the font that is reflective of that platform. So I think that's a pretty good lesson for 28 minutes of your time invested. I think we can go over and take a look at our questions and see if we had anything that came in here. Actually, off screen that I'm looking at, I can see that I didn't get too many questions, but I did get a comment. So let's just switch over before we wrap up this video, just because it's always good to see those on screen. All right, when users are able to copy paste text in various font sizes, font colors, how can I override the stored font and display it in the text in the font of my choosing? When users are able to paste text in various fonts. So I'm presuming, Ahmed, that you're talking about when you say paste in text, because I've been dealing with layout mode and our design of our layout. When you say paste, I'm guessing you're talking about when they are pasting into a field. And when they paste, that formatting came as a result of copying from another location. And we can see that quite clearly when I switch over here. I'll give you the solution. We want to look at the window of time track right here. And I know this will be the case, so we'll go into browse mode. And I've got a field right here. And so you're talking about pasting. Let's go over to Safari. And I am going to copy this text from Safari. So I'm going to copy our recent videos. Now, as far as I know, this only applies to Macintosh. On Windows, I don't know that styling comes over. So I'm assuming you're working on Macintosh. But on Macintosh, the clipboard stores multiple things, and one of those things is styling that comes from other applications. So when I copy from Safari here, the styling of the font size and the color will come on the Macintosh into FileMaker. So when I paste, notice that I'm getting everything the same. My head's probably in the way, but the text here matches the text here. And when I click there, it retains that styling. Now, FileMaker remembers the styling of text when you paste into a field. How do you remove it? It's a very easy solution. We will go into our defined database. Let me quickly look at the field, what this is. I believe it's description. There we go. Yep. It is indeed description right there. And we will go into define database or manage database. We will go to the description. We will double click and we will go to the auto enter options. And our auto enter options is going to be, currently we have it set to a lookup. So I think that's a mistake. What am I looking up here? The description. I'm looking up the description for a stop time from the start time. I'm going to turn that off temporarily because I probably wouldn't be doing that anyway. But this is what we would do for the description. We would say remove format. Where's the format? Text format remove. There you go. Easy peasy. There's our solution. You would text format remove on any field where you do not want the style to be copied from another application, such as the case with Macintosh. But on Windows, I don't believe that happens. So that's the solution right there. And you will find that under all of the format functions right here of the text formatting, where you're going to be able to then even apply any other formatting that you want. So the first thing you can do is you can take off formatting. Then wrapped within this function, if you wanted to forcibly apply any other formatting, you can then choose to apply a specific font, to apply a specific size, or a specific text color. So good question, and hopefully that helps anybody else out who has that question with regards to copying and pasting text. And I hope that answered the question. All right. Let's see, comment. Good to add that some fonts are better for viewing than others when printing and reporting. Yes, oops, I didn't mean to drag that out. There we go. Yes, when it comes to reporting, Arial, there are fonts that are designed for the screen, which are things like Tahoma, Verdana, and a couple others. You can find all of this information on Wikipedia. They are a little bit wider in their kerning in terms of what they look like. But like if you go to Verdana for a font, you'll find that is a little too wide. And sometimes you need to get more information into a smaller space. So you'll choose a font that's more narrow. Code showing that in a monospaced font like Courier or Monaco. Monaco is only on Macintosh. You can probably get it on Windows. Courier and Courier New are the two cross-platform monospaced fonts. I meant to, yeah, there we go, text format remove. So HBH Group gave the same answer, but I gave it in video. Thank you, HBH Group, for the answer. All right, and we have one question here. If I delete Arial and rename Helvetica font to Arial, will it change all the fonts? That's a good question, but in this particular case, no. If you simply rename something, so here's my fonts folder. We'll take a look at that. So my fonts folder right here, if I went into this font folder and found Arial, or let's say Helvetica, we'll go down to wherever Helvetica is, or whatever. I don't know. Let's just pick anything here, Matt. Let's go all the way up at the top. So this Calibri font right here. If I click and I rename the name of this font file, it has no bearing whatsoever in terms of how FileMaker determines what the font is underneath. The name of the file that is used is not how FileMaker determines the font internally. There is an internal number in the font file itself that identifies the font, as far as I'm aware. And that's basically how it works. So renaming the name of a font file will not change anything in terms of the font. In fact, it may cause problems, as far as I'm aware, in terms of that font linking. I don't know exactly, but hey, you can always experiment. Whenever I want to learn something in FileMaker, I just go ahead and do it and experiment. All right, so without any further questions, I hope that's given you some good information about fonts and FileMaker Pro, and that's going to give us a nice wrap. If you have any information about fonts, put that in the comments down below. Leave them for other people. Anything that's additionally helpful that I forgot to mention, or maybe I mentioned that was wrong. And I think that's going to give us our wrap for today. So let's cue up that music. And of course, you can check out FileMakerThemes.com. All themes are including 14 typefaces now, which is really cool, not just one typeface. If you'd like to be notified, click here. You can subscribe on YouTube, and the next video in this series will pop up right here. Otherwise, much luck to you, and until next time, happy filemaking.